You've have the opportunity to create brands, identities for some of the most iconic brands in the world. What have you learned about what it takes to build a great brand?
Oh God, I thought you'd ask me that. It takes people who trust you, and it takes people willing to listen and go the way that you suggest they go. It comes out of relationship, basically.
How do those client relationships evolve for you? Like, how do you choose which clients you want to work with?
I can't remember working for anybody if I didn't like them. Now, that's not some sort of test they have to get through, but it's always sort of worked out that way. I mean, right from the very start, I think empathy with other human beings has always been the cornerstone of the foundation of what I've been able to do, always.
What role do you think that does the client play in the design process?
Huge, because you have to grasp why. I mean, you know, the how and what is quite straightforward. The why is often very difficult. So, for example, now I'm working with a Russian bank. One of the questions is, why are you running this bank? Why is this bank here? What do you want to achieve by running this bank? And if people aren't open, and if you can't establish what's the raison d'etre, what's the reason to be, it's very difficult to guide somebody as to how they should express themselves. So it's getting to that point of why you're here. And people will often answer me and say, well, we're here to make money. And I always say, well, no, that's the printers and the Royal Mint or whoever makes money in whichever country I'm in. You don't actually make it, you earn it. And you earn it, as most of us do, in a combination of giving people value and to some extent ripping them off. That always is happening. So you find a blend that you feel happy with and that they feel happy with. And that's the basis of the kind of honesty that you have to have. So for me, I kind of disappear the word client. I don't like the word client. You know, I don't like to be my dentist's client. You know, I want to be a person for whom my dentist has respect for my teeth. And so it's based on mutual respect, actually.
And what about education? Like, how much do you feel like education plays in that client relationship as a designer?
Well, you know, I don't think of myself as a teacher, partly because I spent 20 years resenting teachers. But I guess that there is some sort of leading somebody forward, which you can do because you can see the wood from the trees, and they often see the trees and not the wood. So yeah, there is a certain amount of teaching in it, and a certain amount of offering people glimpses of what they could become. I can give you a very small example of that. A small company that thought, this is an English expression, bashing metal. They took small commercial trucks and turned them into buses by bashing the metal. And the buses were used to transport people in parts of England where the transport system was weak. And I told them what they were doing was providing transport in places where there were social problems. They hadn't thought of that was what they did. They thought they just converted trucks. And when they realized that they did something of much greater value for people, I think they enjoyed their work more, and I think the company felt much more valuable, and that's very useful.
Just shifting gears, what do you think on a design level it is that really makes brands resonate with people? Is it great execution? Is it emotion?
What is it that makes people... What was the question?
What is it that makes brands resonate with people?
Why do they get fascinated by them? Because they touch something in them. There's a wonderful quote by Maya Angelou, which has guided me for quite a few years. And she says, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that is such a fundamental thing for anyone really in the communication business to understand. Because people don't read what you write, they write what they read. They read what they read, and people don't hear what you say, they hear what they hear. So for example, I don't know how many people are sitting in here, but they will be editing out of what all of us are saying, what touches them, what means something to them, what connects with them, and the rest of it, of course, they'll discard because people are saying thousands of things in here. You're not going to remember them all.
Yeah.
I have a question that personally curious about. As a person who's done so many brands, who's created so many brands, is there any brand that you'd like to redesign that you haven't done?
But that I particularly like. I can't say that I know for sure that everything I've done has worked. You know, if I look at some of the things I've done and I ask myself, would another name have been better or worse or different? I can't honestly put my hand on my heart and say there was no other way of doing this except for one job that I did a long, long time ago for a tiny model-making company. And why it worked was this. I went to see this guy and I asked him why he was in the model-making business. And he said because he was obsessed with accuracy and he loved architecture. That's two quite good answers. So I said, well, presumably everybody in the model-making industry is obsessed with accuracy. He said, you would be amazed how inaccurate some models are. And he started to talk to me about accuracy and how different materials expanded and contracted and all this kind of model-making world stuff. And so what we did for him was we've got some scale rules from here, from New York actually, a company called Staedtler, and they were incredibly accurate. And it was in the days where you had to do artwork by hand. I mean, just in parenthesis, I hired one guy who drew his name in a brush with one hair in 6-point gill light, by hand. So he did this artwork. And it was unbelievably accurate. And our production guy found some paper with minimum shrinkage and expansion in climate. And we put all these different scale rules around. He didn't need many things, around his paper, around his visiting card, around his nameplates and things like that. He never walked into an architect's office without the architect taking his card, rushing over to a scale rule, measuring it, saying, this is fantastic, and giving him the job. So I knew that that had worked. But I can't honestly put my hand on my heart and say that everything I've done has had that kind of appropriateness. People have liked it. It's done its job. It still does its job in many cases, but it's very difficult to claim that nothing else would have done as good a job.
So how, I mean, you've been in the design business for so many years. How has your creative process changed?
For me, it works, oh God, it means telling a little story, okay? When I thought this was autobiographical, by the way. It turned out to be that most people have very similar experience. When I started, I had heroes in the design world. People like Paul Rand, people like Bill Bernbach, amazing writing. So I had heroes. And if my work resembled the work of a hero, I settled for it. I was excited that it looked like someone else had done it. And nobody had taught me the word plagiarism. I didn't know such a thing existed. So I was content. And then somebody told me about plagiarism, and I was discontented. And then I met Wolff Olins, who was a crucible of reason. I mean, he made me feel fairly stupid. Unfortunately, I made him feel fairly inept. So we kind of,
It's a perfect match.
we kind of met as very opposite personalities. Mm. And I remember reading George Bernard Shaw. I know somebody else quoted him earlier this morning. What did he say? He said, nothing is achieved by a reasonable man. So I sort of scoffed at Wally's reasonableness, and he scoffed at my exuberance, I suppose. But I kind of thought, well, reason is very useful. And I thought that imitation is actually very useful. And I thought of them as two separate rooms that I would go into. And then there was a third room, which was I'd done something and it worked. So why not do it again, only with a false moustache and a pair of glasses? Just make it look different. And so we did some work which was really repeating a formula that seemed to work. And I realized that that was kind of like creating creativity, making creativity happening by precedent. And I looked at myself quite hard, and we met and talked about this. And that's why you had that quote up there earlier, that to create is to bring something to life that wasn't there before, whether it's a baby or whatever it is. And I realized that the only way I can do that is to go into a place called nothing. So I create by being nowhere and sort of having nothing going on and trusting the creativity that everybody in this room has got to produce something that wasn't there before. And I think that's how it happens. It doesn't come from thinking, it doesn't come from imitation, it doesn't come from precedent and your past experience. That's why I say my past experience isn't my greatest friend, actually, because it tries to tell me that I know what to do. I'd rather not know what to do and wait for something to happen. Like this meeting we're having here. I have no idea what you're going to ask me.
Talking about early days and starts, what do you think is the biggest mistake that, in your experience, you've seen young designers make?
I think a big mistake, there are many mistakes that we all make. I think the vanity is probably one of the biggest mistakes that we fall for. I mean, brain surgeons don't have brain surgery effective awards. I mean, we are obsessed with patting ourselves on the back. And I think that's a shame, because I think most people are actually quite humble and quite modest, but we get caught up in that. And it's kind of, there is a consequence of that, which is that we can easily drift into what you and I were just talking about a few moments ago, that that design to some extent can be an agreement system amongst designers. So, for example, there are 20 great teapots, I mean, maybe 100, I don't know, and they're sitting in museums of modern art, or in the British Museum. Some of them come from hundreds of years ago, and we idolize these teapots as being superb and supreme. There are then hundreds of thousands of teapots that people just like. You know, a brown one with a cream stripe around it, or whatever, or it belonged to their mother or grandmother, or whatever. We don't know much about why people like what they like, despite all the research and stuff that goes into it. So we end up knowing a great deal about very little and very little about a great deal. And that goes for, if you look at art directors' annuals, you will see a kind of, sameness isn't quite the right word, but sort of sameness. And if you go to a city like Stockholm and you see company buildings, and they're all these aggressive, assertive, indifferent blocks with very unpleasant atriums that are meant to make you shrink to the size of a mouse, and offices that I don't understand at all. I mean, I've never understood any boardroom I've ever been into. And all that kind of thing. And then they've got symbols on the buildings, which have been very carefully graphicked by somebody, usually an abstract thing or something. And you look at it and you think, this is a paradigm of design. And somehow companies have got caught up in it. And what is it? Why do they all dress the same? And you know, what is going on with corporate self-expression? And I've never read anything. I don't remember. There may be some exceptions. I'm making sweeping remarks. But if I compare almost anything that's come out of any company compared with a paragraph of Nabokov, it's junk. It's written to be written. It's actually written to be approved. And so I would encourage any designers, I'm swerving into another issue now, to respect the power of great writing, because it is transformative and wonderful. I just, you know, I'm so amazed that people can write. That for me, it's a joy to work with great writers, because most design goes with very indifferent writing. And when I hear the word "the copy," I shudder.
That's good, me too.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. So how do you know, you're talking about sort of going this place of nowhere and trying to stay away from that
Yeah.
false vanity. How do you, how do you do those things, and how do you stay engaged and keep your ideas fresh, so that you cannot kind of get into those pitfalls?
Well, something is born. I think an earlier speaker said discovered, rather than imagined. And I have, I think I've again spoken about this, 3 muscles that I really think of as muscles. And one is the muscle of curiosity. And that drives you insane, because you say, well, why is this like this? Why is the interior of an airplane like this? It's basically a converted bomber. Why are we traveling in economy for 14 hours with somebody's seat in the hitting the front of our nose? Why can't everybody lie down if they're flying for more than 6 hours? Why can't I tell how to turn this tap? Why do we have this spout coming into a bath that will scalp you? I mean, why? And you can get into much greater detail with that. You go to a hospital, and you see the consultants sometimes walking down the center of a ward, which is still the ward that Florence Nightingale used, because it's designed not for the patients. Why are they called patients? It's designed, mostly should be called impatients, actually. But anyway, so they walk down this aisle, and they will refer to people by, I could do it to you, this is a coronary, and this, I think, is probably, not sure what that, I can't remember, what's this? Oh, yes, that's a no change. Yes. And they don't know your name, and you don't know who they are. Very simple to interview whoever brings you into hospital if you're there for more than one day, and say, what would you like to be called, and what's the one thing people would like to hear about you? So, I'm Michael, I'm a cab driver in Birmingham. Okay, that tells you something. And if I've got a white coat on and it says registrar, what the F is that? What is that? And why do they say oncology when they mean cancer? So all this comes from curiosity. And if you don't push your curiosity until it almost becomes unbearable, you don't nourish your imagination. So your imagination is enriched by continuous curiosity about things, and also continuous appreciation. What does it feel like to be this person? What does it feel like to be in this hospital bed? And if you understand how to be in other people's shoes, whether it's a CEO of a company or a patient in a hospital or somebody of 80 who has this disease, which is a brain disease, which we stupidly call dementia, which makes people think they're crazy when they're not crazy. It's a really ridiculous word. And then your imagination starts to work. And you say, well, we talk about heart diseases. Why don't we talk about brain diseases? Where did this word dementia come from? It's like cerebral palsy. It sounds like the 15th century. It's such weird language. And it's everywhere. I mean, every profession has it. And every trade has it to some extent. I'm not saying it's all rubbish. Of course I'm not. I'm just saying that if you're curious about it, you start to be able to question things. And as you question things, you start to have empathy for the people who are in these situations. And as you have that empathy and that curiosity, you start to see it doesn't have to be like that. It could be like this. And that comes from a sort of nothingness about it, really. Yeah.
I just have one last question, which is, what's the best piece of advice that someone has ever given you that helped you as a designer?
Oh, God. Can I take 2 minutes? This is not advice. This is a piece of revelation that somebody gave me. Okay, I was 10, and it was in the UK, and the war was on, so I was sent to all sorts of places. Schools, I think they were called, and my parents moved around in different cities and places like that. And I went on holiday, and there was a guy who was a friend of my mother's. I have no idea what their relationship was. I was 10. But this guy looked about 12 foot tall, very furrowed brow, dark complexion, very deep voice, and everything about this man completely terrified me. So if he was there, I wasn't. I'd be up in my room or something like that. And on one occasion, I went back, and he was there, and I disappeared. And in the morning, my mother called me and said, he's called Gregory. Is anyone in here called Gregory? Because you've got no chance with me if you are. So she said, Gregory is going to the post office this morning. Will you go with him and take this letter and post it? And I said, why don't you ask Gregory to post it, in my unbroken voice? And she said, go with Gregory. So I had to go with this man, and we lived on a road which was made of gravel. And I remember the deep, crunchy sound of his feet on the gravel. And I sounded like a canary on sandpaper in a birdcage. And we walked in, it felt like hours, probably about 2 minutes. And he turned to me from his amazing height and said, why are you so selfish? Which is not a nice thing to say to a 10-year-old boy, really. And I was absolutely, the French word is bouleversé, turned upside down. I didn't know, I couldn't feel my feet anymore. I didn't know who I was. It was an absolutely crushing remark. And again, it seemed like an age, and I turned and I said, what do you mean? And he said, you're 10 years old, and you let your mother make your bed. And it was, for me, one of the most devastating moments. But I also realized, and this is the point, really, the answer to your question, I realized that people can see how you behave. I hadn't realized that behavior is that visible. And that has always stayed with me to the point at which I know that brand is actually behavior. And even appearance is a result of behavior. It's about behavior. And very few companies understand how behavior is seen. So in most companies that I work, I would say there's abuse of hierarchy taking place. Well, abuse of hierarchy is not a recognized term. This is people smiling at people just because they're senior. This is people being paid absurd amount of money, not but for what they do, but for who they are. So I learned then, and I've never forgotten, that everything is seen. And if you write dismissively to people, they may never give you the feedback, but you've written dismissively. So that all our behavior, and again in the world of brands this is hugely important, people can feel it. It goes back to the Maya Angelou quote. They don't know what you've said, they don't remember what you did, but they remember how you feel. And so many people feel belittled by the way we are, by work, by offices and things like that. It's a huge potential for us to address this. And that's why I'm still excited by what I do.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much, Michael.